Our technical difficulties have all been resolved, and so we're ready to get going here. I'm Felicity Barringer. I'm a national environmental correspondent for the New York Times, and I'll be moderating this panel. And to start it off, I just wanted to go to James Goldstene of the Air Resources Board to talk about where we are today and how we got there for about 5 minutes, and then we'll go into the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Felicity. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I know that we're the last panel before lunch, so we're going to make it really interesting for you this morning. We're going to try, we've been, of course, listening to the other panels before us this morning, and I think some of the information you will have already heard, but just to recap, all of you know about AB 32 passing in 2006, which directed my agency to develop what we call the scoping plan, which was the list of measures that we would implement to meet the AB 32 goal of reducing California's emissions to 1990 levels by 2020. Much of the work we've been doing you know about, including the work we've done on advanced clean cars, low carbon fuel standards, and measures to reduce high global warming pollutants. But of course, cap and trade is the rule that has gotten the most attention. And of course, as I think all of you know, we've been working with our partners now for many years in the Western Climate Initiative, and I'm pleased to be here with Jean-Yves and Michael and Tim, who Felicity will start asking questions of all of us shortly. So the current status, of course, is that the rule in California has been completed. The rule in Quebec has been completed, and we're planning to bring to my board in June of this year a linking regulation to link our two programs together. And then after that, we expect that the province of Ontario and then the province of British Columbia will follow. And then, of course, and we'll probably talk about this a little bit, depending on what happens after the election in November, maybe we can get some more states to join us back. So we'll talk about that as we go on this morning. So I think that's just a quick overview about where we are. I think you all know that we're continuing to work on development of offsets. We're in the process of developing the actual platforms, the electronic platforms that will facilitate trading and tracking and oversight. And again, you may have questions about that, or that'll come up as we speak. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add before Felicity takes over.
Okay, thank you very much, James.
Yeah.
So I wanted to start out, if I could, on the northern side of the border, just because I think many people have some sense of how the process worked in California, and perhaps a little less sense of how Quebec and British Columbia got to where they are today. So I wanted to ask you, Jean-Yves, and then Tim, please chime in as necessary. Can you give us regional specifics? What are the major emission sources in the two provinces? How fast are your new controls going to come down over time? And how did you get buy-in from the stakeholders in your communities over time, which I would guess that this was not something instant. So, and also I would guess that buy-in from your stakeholders is crucial to the stability and longevity of your programs. Jean-Yves, take it away.
Well, thank you. In terms of our largest sources of emissions, for Quebec, if we look at the electricity sector, basically it's most hydroelectricity that we produce. We're the biggest producers in North America. About 96% of our electricity production is renewable. So we almost don't have any emission coming from that sector. It leaves us with our industrial sector, which is about 25-26% of our emissions. And then the biggest emitter comes from the transport sector, which is a little bit over 40% of our total emissions. So that's one of the features we have with the Western Climate Initiative, the design to cover all the fuels used in transport beginning 2015, which is a major sector for us to achieve our mitigation goal. So this is mostly our scope of emissions that we have.
I would guess that the people, particularly in the transportation fuels business, were not enthusiastic to begin with. How do you take a stakeholder who's going to be a regulated party for whom this is going to be a cost over time and get buy-in?
Well, thank you. Honestly, I got to say, in Quebec, unlike what I've seen in other jurisdictions, we always had a strong support for action to fight against climate change. General population, but also industrial sectors. The government of Quebec began its work in year 2000 approximately to be involved in climate change. In 2006, we came up with the first climate action plan to reduce our emission by 12% below 1990 level for this year by 2012. Within that first climate action plan, we had some measures that dealt with industry, voluntary measures to help them become greener. A lot of investment were made in our public transit policy to start reducing emission from this transport sector. From there, we joined the WCI in 2008. We had legislation passed in 2009 that allows us to put in place a cap-and-trade system. So very slowly, we began meeting with all of the emitters that would be regulated under our cap-and-trade system. And we explained them what it is, how it's going to work. And that's basically how, meeting with them over the years on a regular basis and quite frequently, that we got their support for cap-and-trade. I think mostly if someone don't understand what is your system, they cannot buy into it. As long as we made them understand what it is, how it works, we got basically a good support.
Great. Tim, how would that contrast with British Columbia, if at all?
I think British Columbia is similar in emissions makeup. We have about a third. A third of the emissions in BC, greenhouse gas emissions, come from buildings. A third come from transportation, and about a third from industrial sources. So one tool doesn't solve all of the problems there. We have a variety of ways that we are approaching the emission reductions across the economy, and especially for the industrial sector, we see cap-and-trade or saw cap-and-trade early on as something that industry had indicated was of interest. They wanted to have some flexibility in the way things were, the way targets were applied, the way we were going to achieve our goals. We set a province-wide goal in 2007 at 33% reduction over 2007 levels by 2020. A pretty significant target, a meaningful target for the province in the sincerity that was behind the need to show significant effort and show leadership on a file that in Canada at the time was not very often discussed.
Do you remember thinking at one point in reference to some particular stakeholder or another, and it'd be great if you would tell us who, I can't believe we're ever going to get this guy, this representative, this industry over to our side. This is this is never going to work. Was there a moment when a case like that turned around, and what did turn it around?
I think most sectors that we work with, most industrial sectors, initially simply resist a regulator. When I moved to the government, I came from the electricity sector, and so my job was on the other side of the table before that. And I brought as much of that perspective with me to my role as I could, and worked with the Secretariat in a lot of different ways with our industries. We formed working groups with each sector organization so that they had a chance to sit in the room with us and walk through all of the work that we've done since the WCI started. We've gone back to British Columbia, worked through all of the details, all of the proposed approaches, all the recommendations in draft form and final form that the WCI has done in the room with those stakeholders. So there was no surprises for the people that were going to get regulated by these programs. And let them actually come to some working groups. We, as an example, early on, the level of understanding of how the electricity system on the West Coast works became a barrier to us effectively including it in cap and trade in a way that wasn't going to create a bunch of negative outcomes for the electricity market.
Why?
And
Why would that be?
well, if you don't know how transactions are made and how electricity flows, it doesn't always go in straight lines like it looks on the map. And what contracts, what electricity sector contracts care about, how they're structured, when they happen. So we brought those people into a room with all of the people that were working on approaches for first measuring, and then including electricity, both generated and imported, in the cap and trade program, and spent over a year working with them to figure out how to do this in a way that was not going to create chaos, and used as much of the existing infrastructure of the electricity sector in the way that we regulate it. So in the reporting, first of all, and then in the emissions trading component. So trying to make sure that they had the chance to actually puzzle through the difficult parts with us and come up with solutions that would work for them. They're not perfect from any perspective, because they have to take all these considerations all of these issues into consideration, but they seem to be turning out a program that is not going to mess up the electricity sector. They're actually going to work right alongside it. And it's in the final stages there. There's still things we're working through as you go to implement. But it was something new for the partners that were around the table. It made them very nervous, having all of their folks that were working on regulations sitting down on a regular basis, monthly, weekly phone calls, trying to figure out how to make this regulation work for that sector, but very important. And electricity crosses all the borders. So we had to have all of those people and all of the companies in the room at the same time.
Great. And James, I had a question for you about AB 32, which is now officially underway, and next January becomes really officially underway as it goes into effect in a you have to start actually enforcing, and you're going to start actually enforcing. So, given that the low carbon fuel standard, which is a significant portion of California's reductions, is in abeyance right now, and its ultimate fate is not clear. What, for the remainder of, or for the emissions covered by AB 32, the cap and trade law, what are the metrics by which you're going to measure the success over time? You've got a goal to get to a certain amount of reductions by 2020, but there's, what are the benchmarks along the way? And is it just going to be emissions, or are there going to be another set of metrics that you work with? Finally, if you fall behind your projected curve, particularly with the existing question marks around the low carbon fuel standard, what are you going to do about it?
That's a good question, Felicity.
There's three of them.
Questions. First of all, we're very confident we'll prevail on the litigation regarding the low carbon fuel standard, so I don't really think that's going to be an issue about losing the tons that we're going to get from that program. We are actually implementing the program, but at the moment we can't actually enforce it. But we do hope to prevail, and many of the oil companies are actually going forward on implementation. Some aren't, but most of them are. In terms of objectives and goals, we're very careful about making sure that we monitor the greenhouse gas inventory in the state and keep that up to date. And so we are able to see how we're doing as we go. As you say, the cap and trade program will go into full force and effect January 1st of 2013. As I think most everyone knows, we're going to have our first auction in November. The other things that we're looking at, not just in addition to greenhouse gas reductions and the environmental objective that we're really focused on, we also have to make sure that whatever we do doesn't have any adverse impacts on any of the other work we do in terms of air quality or adversely impact other communities. So we want to make sure that we're always monitoring the work we do in all of our rules to make sure there are no adverse effects. And of course, and we're seeing this, that the work we're doing and the work that we've done at the Air Resources Board for the past 40 years in terms of promulgating regulations has a forcing effect that causes innovation and technology development to happen And we're actually seeing increases in investment in high-tech sectors and other sectors. Green investment is going up, by the billions coming into California. So we're seeing also really very positive economic effects from what we're doing, and we're keeping track of that.
But if you start, you say you expect you won't fall behind the projected curve. If you do, is there anything you can do to get back on track?
Well, cap and trade actually gives us flexibility in that regard. So if we see that we're not meeting our goals, we can adjust. There are different ways to adjust the program to help make that up. But again, I think the mix of measures that we have in place, low carbon fuel standard, the clean car standards, all the other rules that we have going forward, including the implementation of the plans that are coming out of the SB 375 rule, I think we're going to make our 2020.
Translate SB 375.
Oh, SB 375 is about land use planning, and my board sets targets for the regions in the state to meet certain greenhouse gas reduction goals. So I think all of that combined will allow us to meet our 2020 goals with a great level of certainty. The real issue, though, is to 2050. How do we, as a society and a world, move forward to get the significant greenhouse gas reductions that we need to have by 2050, which are up to 80 to 90% reductions that we need to reduce the global warming that we're seeing.
Jean-Yves, if you could just jump in here for a second. Are you doing anything differently in Quebec to check and make sure that you're moving along the right path as you go? And do you have a mechanism for adjustment in your system to if you find that your emissions are not going down as fast as you planned?
Well, thank you. We do have emission reporting in place. It's been in place for more than 10 years now in Quebec. We produce our own greenhouse gas inventory, just like James mentioned it. That's the way we do measure our success in terms of reaching our mitigation goal. We have an initial one of 6% below 1990 for this year. Our emission has been decreasing since 2003, so we're in a good path to achieve it, actually. And from there, we want to reach 20% below 1990 in 2020. So this is one way. We have our inventory. The system gives us flexibility. Let's say reduction don't happen as fast. The cap is still decreasing, and we'll be covering more than about 85% of total emission within our economy. So if reductions don't happen, the price will increase a little bit. The price of allowances, which will spur more reductions to happen. So the cap and trade is, in a way, auto-regulates itself to make sure that it does achieve the level of reduction that is required.
And you have complete confidence that it'll be successful?
We have complete confidence. As I mentioned, we had an initial climate action plan where we invest a lot of money in public transit, green technology to help our industry grow better, to start a shift of our economy to become greener. And like James was mentioning it, we want to reach a level of reductions toward 2050 of about 80 to 90%. And I think what we have to do right now is to give all the tools and really start that shift in our economy right now to be able to achieve a bigger level of reduction towards 2050. So with the revenues from the cap and trade system, our government is going to spend $2.5 billion over the next years to really start that green shift in our economy. This is our new climate action plan that will be announced in the upcoming months.
And Michael, forgive me, I don't mean to ignore you.
Well, thank you very much. I actually wanted to go back to something that both Tim and James had touched on, which was the importance of this program through the Western Climate Initiative being an enduring policy to get us to 2050 as a way to ratchet down on emissions over time. And I think Jean-Yves just described well how that tool, among other tools, will help us do that. And one of the things I think the Western Climate Initiative has brought to this area generally has been a collaboration among not just those of us who are here today, but other states and provinces that have a very diverse set of economies and resources in their states and perspectives on how to do this. And we were able to develop a program with substantial input from stakeholders, as Tim had described, that combines all those requirements and combines all those concerns and perspectives into a program that can work not just in our jurisdictions, but more broadly across North America, certainly throughout the United States and Canada. And being able to demonstrate that from both the environmental and economic performance in our states will help move this issue forward. And so that's an important thing that WCI, I think, has enabled, the coming together of the diverse perspectives to produce a program design, and now for us to actually implement that and put it on the ground and demonstrate it to enable this enduring policy to actually contribute to the solution.
So, and I also wanted to follow up with you just a second, and again, anybody else jump in here, but carbon prices are at in a not very strong position right now. You could argue they're at a low ebb. When is that going to change? What's going to change it? And how high do they really need to be for you all to be sure that this is a robust market that can function, as Jean-Yves said, as you want it to, as an economic tool for the policy goal?
Sure. Well, I think there's a couple different ways to look at that. Our principal objectives are to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to do it in a way that grows the economy and creates jobs and investment. So we think we have, with our full set of programs, an approach to do that. The carbon price reflects what it costs to achieve these emissions reductions. And whether they're low or high, the importance, of course, is that we're actually achieving the emissions reductions. With that said, we do want to have a stable carbon price to promote investment, so that there's some certainty that if you take steps to reduce emissions, that you develop new technologies, that they will pay off. And so, for example, in the Western Climate Initiative program design, we have a floor price at our auctions, which we think is a fairly robust price, starting at $10 and then escalating through 2020, as a mechanism to provide that certainty for investment so that you, in fact, can begin this transformative change that we want to see from our large emitting industries and our transportation system. So we've tried to design the program in a way so that we have the proper incentives and that we can, in fact, see that transformative change. And so that's how we've approached it here.
And what do you think is going to push the prices higher? Do you think there will be a bump at the moment that California's program really is sort of ready for the road?
It's hard to speculate about market prices, and we try to avoid doing that. I mean, the program has been designed to avoid abruptness. It has some safety valves if prices go too high. We think the $10 floor is important because the other programs in the EU and the RGGI program, which I guess would be fair to say suffered from a lack of inventory and stringency at the beginning of the program, had very low trading prices, and we wanted to make sure that the trading price drove the investment and other things in the long-term changes that we're seeking, but that it gave people some certainty about what they're looking for, the regulated entities and others who are going to be investing in the market.
And Tim?
Well, I was just going to say the market fundamentals are established. They're already starting to get established. Things that drive the supply and demand for the market that's evolving. As final decisions get made on design and people get experience, the risk will come out, and so you might see a price change as companies become more comfortable with how things function. Major investments could be more or less expensive, and that'll drive the price up and down. And so the first part of the program will have a little bit of bumpiness to it, but the goal is to anticipate it. And I think the safety valves that we've got in there, both high and low price, are designed not to prevent emission reductions or stop the process at a certain point, but to weed out the bumps that are caused along the way at the start of this and make sure that doesn't become a reason that there's a decision to do something like move to a different approach or take some time to figure out how to adjust the market, because you really, once you set it up, you don't want to put your fingers back into it too often as the regulator. You want to let those bumps work themselves out, but companies need to know that you are watching and you've got some boundaries on how far you'll let that go. So I think there's a lot of market intelligence developing now about what the California market will look like and the linked market, and there's already really good risk mitigation tools out there for companies to use to basically enable themselves to sleep at night, not worrying about whether the market's going to look like this tomorrow or that, because they learn from other markets how to cover their positions and make sure their assets are not going to get impacted by high prices at the wrong time. That's some basic trading that really brings some benefit, or basic trading knowledge and experience that brings benefit to this approach, is companies know how to do that on their supply chains already. They buy and sell feedstock, they buy and sell commodities, they sell their products into different markets, and they're good at predicting where the markets are going to go.
The offset or the allowance is another.
Exactly. It's getting to the point where all of the players in the market understand which fundamentals they need to follow and how that fits with their product and the positions that they want to take. And that will take a little bit to work itself out, because it's all theoretical right now. So they're running it on computer models and simulating different approaches and strategies and things. But until January 1st, when the trading can begin and the activities take place, there'll always be a little bit of uncertainty, and you could what-if yourself to death trying to think through all those scenarios in your head. But it's another commodity market, and so a lot of those same approaches will be applicable. And the people that are in the room here from brokerages and things explain that to their clients all day, every day right now, and it's not scary to them. It's something that they see instant applicability of the things that they've learned in other markets.
One of the things that I've been curious about, and I wanted to put this to all of you, but to James first, and then everybody else, as I said, please chime in. Is there going to be a sort of backward effect of, let's assume, as you say, the market goes through the early bumps, it becomes stable, you can analyze the risk, and as California is doing right now, and probably Quebec and British Columbia too, as there are new kinds of offsets being developed, new protocols that essentially allow different markets and different industries to come in and become players here, not as emitters, but as carbon sinks. Is the broadening of the market going to change some of the politics? Let me put it to you with a specific. I know Environmental Defense Fund has been working on a rice protocol, which would work. I don't know the details. It isn't. I don't know if it's been finalized yet, but it is something where you would get, as a rice farmer, the way that you handle your stubble, the way you handle the methane emissions that come from the rot, the way you can capture that and prevent that from going to the atmosphere could, under this scenario, get you credits. Well, the biggest rice farming state in the United States is Arkansas. This is not a place that I think of as being terribly politically wedded to fear, the worries about climate change or efforts to change it. In fact, I looked it up. The congressman who represents the rice-growing district did, in fact, co-sponsor the bill that said the United States government cannot consider the following greenhouse gases as pollutants. Is the fact that those folks might suddenly have skin in this game going to change? Is the game going to, not the game, but the system of trading going to have an impact on the politics?
I think that what we're all working on together in the Western Climate Initiative is a very public exercise in policy leadership in this area. And I think that it may not be the trading so much, which is what your question seemed to focus on, or a particular new offset protocol. But the fact that we're moving forward on this and designing it in such a way that other states and provinces and maybe even other countries can learn from what we've done and then actually grow our market, which would include looking for new offsets opportunities in order to reduce the overall cost of the program. I'll ask Michael actually to explain a little more about the detail of how we've designed in our program, in the Western Climate Initiative program, how we've limited the use of offsets to a certain extent to make sure we get real on-the-ground changes over time. But just specifically to your question about Arkansas, yes, I think that the agriculture industry in Arkansas, if they see an opportunity to make money on this thing that they don't believe in, will still do that, and we'll be very happy.
But you don't think that
they're not going to object to say, "Oh, we're not going to do that." You know, they'll do it if they can. And we're working in California and the other provinces too. Are working with their agricultural industries to look for other opportunities in addition to the Rice Protocol for reductions, because it's a sector that's not regulated. So everything that happens there would be considered additional. You want to quickly just talk about how the offset?
Well, I don't know that there's a lot more to say, James.
Other than
yeah, so we've all undertaken an approach that limits the amount of offset certificates or credits that could be used for purposes of compliance with our programs. There's a couple purposes behind that. One of which is we do want to ensure that actual emissions reductions occur at our emitting industries and our transportation systems in our jurisdictions. So to make sure that that happens, we limit the amount of offsets that could also be used. But there's also, I think, a sort of a deeper issue there, which is that as the entire economies of the world try to reduce their emissions, we are all going to have to make emissions reductions or limit our growth. And you can't offset your way to climate stabilization. So offsets is an important feature for a period of time to help us get our systems in place and help us on a trajectory to transform our economies to a low-emitting economies. But over the longer term, offsets will have a different role than what we've limited here in our programs.
And offsets as well, I guess, in the same thought. The reductions, as long as the quality is there and they're real, it doesn't matter where they actually occur to have an effect on the climate. So they can occur in other states. It's ensuring that you have a way to guarantee the quality of the offsets that matters. And the WCI and jurisdictions are figuring out how that works in the offset programs and in the rules and regulations they're writing right now. And the supply and demand for offsets, by their very nature, they're not included in the cap and trade system. They're not capped sources. And you got pretty comprehensive, whether it's a carbon tax in BC or cap and trade program in Quebec or California, the coverage of those programs doesn't leave a lot of emissions outside of the capped sectors. So those can't become your major route to compliance. There aren't enough of them to do that. And so it's inherent that those offsets get used to moderate the price early on until people figure out what their abatement costs are and their options and their technologies, and then the industries will start to take action. I think in the European system, they have a high abatement cost. And so they will continue to use some level of offsets internationally. And it's really interesting for me to look at the discussion they're having, because they're trying to decide how much domestic action they want. And they're going to move the bar on offsets to get the domestic action. That's how the tool is supposed to work. That's it in action. That's not a problem. That's the policymakers and the people that live there making a decision about how much effort they want to make and at what cost, and then how much they want to mitigate that cost but still hit their targets. It's really great to see them going through. It's not easy discussions, but it's good to see them going through them in a public way like that.
Yeah, this is great. This is all anticipated my next question. But Jean-Yves, I'll just ask you, in terms of the European model, which we've had, I think, 5 years experience with or 7 years experience with at this point, what were the lessons learned, particularly about offsets, and were you able to incorporate those in Quebec and elsewhere?
Well, we all worked together to come up with an offset regulation. we had people from the EU who guided us in designing our system, making sure that we don't fall in the same traps as they did.
What were those traps?
Well, basically mostly on the market mechanism. We have some safety valve, minimum auction price. We are going a little bit more with auction. The way you distribute allowances to stakeholders, to emitters, don't give everything for free for many years right from the start, but give them based on, example in Quebec, based on the level of production someone has, so to avoid windfall profit. So if someone reduces its production, reduces its greenhouse gas emission, you don't really want to give them extra allowances for that, but you want to give an incentive to produce in a greener way. So many little things that we learned, and our design incorporates everything. In terms of offset, I think we have quite a rigorous design criteria to develop our protocols, which we're going to be working together and try to really set a new standard in terms of stringency, making sure that an offset credit is really a reduction, a real one that happened, that it cannot be turned around, especially carbon sink is an area where we have to be very cautious, making sure that, yes, it's permanent.
Anyone else?
I think we drew a lot on some of the design of the mechanisms that were used. The European system doesn't have an offset mechanism. It uses the international UNFCCC mechanism, the clean development mechanism. And so we looked at that design early on. We looked at the way they originate protocols, the way they approve projects and issue certificates. And a lot of that is incorporated into the recommendations that the WCI jurisdictions adopted or made to incorporate those into our rules when they were developed. So there was participation as well by the UK and the EU and other members that were active internationally to help us when we were thinking about the design features early on and point out all of the problems that arose and what they did for solutions, and they offered those to us to say, you could go around these. They might not be problems for you, but they might. So think about that when you make your design. We also incorporated some features that are different than the way they work. We don't have a central regulator, and the UN approach and the European approach both have you might think it's a good thing or a bad thing depending on how you're affected by it and whether you think it's effective, but they have a central regulator that can make some rules, and then all of the jurisdictions participate by those rules. We don't have a central agreement. We are linking the programs and maintaining the sovereignty of each jurisdiction. That was important in our design. So that also features in how the mechanisms and the offsets work across each of the participants in the eventual program.
Yeah, this leads to, again, thank you, to exactly what I was going to ask next, which is, what were the biggest hurdles in terms of just speaking the same language in terms of the rules of your provinces, the rules of California? What is the, what were some of the technical, legal, or regulatory hurdles you had to get over, given that you came in with pretty much a conceptual agreement?
Okay, I don't know. Beside that, we write them in French.
No, I meant... Okay, fair enough.
No, I think we all... Well, we're going through our linking process right now, which is quite burdensome, but in a way, it goes straightforward. We have some design. We have our system, the design of our system. Some part needs to be identical. For just an example, minimum auction price. You cannot have different wording in terms of regulation. We need to have exactly the same minimum auction price to have a common auction altogether. So some of those technical details, it goes quite well. We have a way of writing our regulation which is different than the other Canadian provinces and even the states. We're based on the French system. Other Canadian provinces are based on the English system. Other part, we need to have exactly the same outcome. And by comparing our regulation, we just make sure that the wording we use in Quebec, which uses different words, has exactly the same outcome as the wording in California, in British Columbia, in Ontario. And no, I don't think there was any hurdles per se.
Anything legally?
Well, we had to come to agreement on the amount of offsets we let into the system. We have to make sure that we understood privacy laws in each country, in each state, in each province, to make sure that those things were aligned.
Well, explain a little bit about why privacy was relevant.
Well, one of the challenges that we had early on is that the passage of the Patriot Act here in the United States concerned our colleagues in the provinces, because we weren't sure where and how the information should be stored, for instance, for their regulated entities. As we move towards forming what is now called WCI Inc., which we established recently, we had to make decisions that did have some legal consequence about how we would treat and handle information across border. So things like that had to be worked out. We have formed WCI Inc., which I think most everybody knows, and that acts as the central point where the trading will occur, and similar to Regi Inc. to help facilitate the trading. So we had to work out some issues there, but they've all been worked out. It hasn't been too difficult. The challenge, actually, I think, is making sure we ask the right questions and then answer them. And every once in a while we come across a question we should have asked, and then we have to fix it. But it's been working out very well, and we've been working together now for so many years that even with Jean-Yves' French, we're still able to communicate well and solve issues. I don't know if you guys want to add anything. There's a lot of examples.
Michael, yes.
If I could just, as CAR has had its 10-year anniversary, WCI has now had its 5-year anniversary. And so we've been working together for a long time. And I think part of the challenge we had is, as Tim mentioned, having no central regulatory authority. We are each doing our programs under our own authority. So we have our own processes and our own ways of writing rules, as Jean-Yves mentioned. We also have a set of stakeholders that we're being responsive to and working together with. So in addition to our individual jurisdiction processes, we also had a WCI process on top of that. And we were just actually recently counting up the number of stakeholder engagement actions that we took over the last 5 years, and it's now over 130 different times where we had conference calls and workshops and
not including today.
Not including today. Written comments on drafts of materials and revised drafts of materials, and so there was a broad community of stakeholders that were really assisting us, and it was the exchange across all the jurisdictions of that community that I think helped us come together and be able to address all these issues. As I said before, we all came with little different perspectives, what was going to be important, what we were trying to achieve, and we've all come together and able to put together a single program to achieve those.
Well, we have a little bit of time left. I'm going to take the liberty of running over because we started a little late. I wanted to be sure people had a chance to ask questions. So are there any questions in the audience to begin with, something that you've been burning to ask here? I don't see a hand. Okay. Then let me move. I'm sorry. Let me move on with one other final question. And I'm going to put this, I think, to you, Michael, and see what everybody thinks. Back, when I covered the passage of AB 32 in 2006, and it seemed at that time what was in the air was this was part of like the forward march of progress. And California was going to lead, and very soon the rest of the country was going to follow. Well, there was a gap in the forward march to progress, or has been since then. At the time, it seemed, again, that California was just sort of carrying the flag in front of everybody. Now I get the feeling that California and the Western Climate Initiative, to some extent writ large, are kind of like medieval monks copying the manuscripts so the knowledge is not lost. How do you see this process evolving from the Western Climate Initiative and RGGI into other states, other countries? How fast do you see that happening? And can you use your crystal ball and anticipate anything about when the federal government of the United States or Canada might want to come in?
Sure. The image of monks is just still in my mind there. I don't think of us as monks keeping the wisdom. I think, as I think James said earlier, this has been a very public, a very open process of policy making and policy leadership. And I think that openness and transparency serves us well and serves the issue of trying to address the mitigation side of climate change very well. And we are really standing on the shoulders of those who've come before us that we've learned from. We should not forget the substantial work that, as Tim mentioned, in the EU, as well as the RGGI program, which is going through its program review currently. And so there is tremendous progress. Of course, Australia has now made their progress. So the forward march continues, I think, in a productive manner, and I think we're privileged to be part of that and to help move that along and try to set the latest best practices and standards of excellence on how to do these things, and then others will come next and improve even more, which will be part of the evolution of how to approach it. In terms of the pace at which things happen in the United States, really the crux of your question here, I think there's some civic events coming up in November that will perhaps tell us more about what will happen at individual states and how things will go there, as well as what will happen in Washington, D.C., and the leadership that needs to come out of Washington in order for us to have an effective national program. I think part of this issue is that the physical science is the science. The world is changing. The climate is changing. And the delay in Washington or elsewhere does not change those facts. So the clear evidence of what's happening and the really cry to address that will be coming again. And we want to make sure that there's a set of policy approaches that enable us to take that action in a way that, again, is cost-effective and help grow the economy. And so I think that's where our efforts here and the others around the world are really moving this forward.
I'd like to add to what Michael's saying, which is we still do meet together as a group of states and provinces, which we call this group now North America 2050. And so even though many of our former partner states are not engaging right now with the WCI Cap and Trade program, we still do talk to each other and meet regularly with other states and provinces about climate action of all kinds, because there is a commitment at different levels in other states, although Arkansas has not come to one of these meetings yet, but maybe they will now. And so that effort continues, and we do hope that through that effort, when the time is right in Washington and in Ottawa, we can push quickly for a national program, having done all the work to establish the framework. Again,
Any questions out there? If not, I think I'll say thank you to the audience, and thank you very much to the panelists. I've learned a lot.